Okay, this is a video from Second Thought titled Socialism for Absolute Beginners. I'm pretty much an absolute beginner. I have a vague idea, like everyone does, of what socialism is, but it's probably bastardized by unthinkable amounts of propaganda. So, truthfully, my knowledge of socialism, communism, whatever, it's very surface level. I've got a good idea of what capitalism is, having lived under it for so long. But socialism in general, yeah, not very informed on what it really is. I guess I can tell you what I think it is. From what I understand, it's, when the workers control the means of production. Now that's a very, like, broad term. It's very vague. So the way I interpret that statement is like, you know, it could go two ways, right? Like where every company is just a co-op. Like co-ops exist currently and they operate just fine. But what if every company was a co-op? Amazon was a co-op, and like every single employee owned a piece of the company, distributed maybe evenly sometimes, maybe a little bit unequal, but generally, as an ideology, socialism strives to be more equal, more equitable. And that's in broad terms, something I agree with. I think society should be more equal, more equitable. Not at the expense of like other people's hard work, if that makes sense. But it's definitely something we should strive for. And so like maybe another way you could do socialism would be if there are no companies anymore and everyone just owned everything equally. I think that's more approaching communism. I don't know. We're going to find out. But yeah, it's not something I clearly know too well. The way I have a lot of questions when it comes to socialism, especially like when it comes to communism, a lot of question marks from the things I have watched already, the people I have talked to. So generally my politics tend to lie closer to like social democracy. So like a capitalist system, but where it's heavily regulated and there's a strong social welfare safety net, essentially. And I think that's like, even socialists will tell you that should be like the baseline, the baseline standard. Like, socialists tend to be pretty accepting of socdems, they call social democrats, right? Anything beyond socdem, you're getting a little bit to where the left will outright reject you. Socdems are like surface, like on the bubble, you know what I mean? Not quite truly leftist, because you're still saying capitalism as a beast can be controlled. Socialists will say, no, capitalism cannot be controlled under any circumstance whatsoever. And I'm not sure how I feel about that. Part of me thinks it can be controlled, and part of me is willing to accept maybe it can't. So let's see what Second Thought has to say about it in Socialism for Absolute Beginners, which, again, is what I am. So let's see.
This episode and others like it are made possible by the generous support of my patrons on Patreon. My AdSense revenue has completely tanked in the last couple months. So if you'd like to help support this channel and get a bunch of cool perks while you're at it, consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/secondthought.
Who could possibly think socialism is a good thing?
Socialism is a cocktail that never should be tried.
No, it's turpentine.
None of those ingredients are good.
The last thing we want in the United States is socialism.
According to a new survey, 70% of American millennials say they'll likely vote socialist, and one...
Interesting. What is this?
You're not getting used to that?
I wonder what this poll is, though. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where it is a Fox News poll from the 5. You know what I mean?
And 3 of them view communism favorably.
The term socialist has been gaining traction for the past couple of years. There's a good chance an increasing number of people around you are using that word to describe themselves. More and more Americans are. Maybe one of those people even sent you this video. Maybe one of those people even sent you this video. This video is about what people mean when they call themselves socialists. I'm going to be covering as much ground as possible in as little time as I can to give you a better understanding of a word we hear all the time, but that rarely gets explained all that well. And before we do, I know that at least a chunk of you will be coming in with a negative opinion of socialism, and that's totally fine. Feel free to voice that in the comments or the invisible to you but very real to me dislike bar. All I ask is that you stick around for a while after you do. Politics is all about disagreement, but to have meaningful disagreements, you need to know what it is you disagree with. Let's get started. The central idea that unites all socialists is maximizing freedom for everyone, regardless of who they are. Generally speaking, socialists want people to have the kinds of rights that ensure they have that freedom. The guaranteed right to education, healthcare, food, and shelter, to participate in and constitute democratic bodies, the right...
Was that the actual audio mix? Yeah, I mean, I want all that too. And like I said earlier, like, you know, I'm probably more closely aligned to social democrats, and those are the kinds of things socdems at minimum want. You know, like, okay, if you can keep your capitalism if we've got a baseline level of social welfare, meaning healthcare, education. Those are like kind of the big two. I would say I'm more on like the left-leaning side of socdems, to where like I think even housing should be a universal right, like a baseline level of housing, and food as well. Like you should get a stipend of food, like budget every whatever month. If you can't afford it. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't think that makes you a socialist, though. Like, so I said this yesterday. I was talking to somebody in the stream. Social policies and socialism are not the same thing. They have a similar root. You know, the word social is in there for a reason. But social policies are not an economic organization. It's not an economic system, right? Like, you can have social policies and still have a capitalist economic system. And so I think that's going to be what this guy discusses here.
To free time and leisure. All of these are rights that increase our freedom and the extent to which we can flourish and live a good life. But it's not enough that these rights exist on paper. People need to be able to exercise them. If you have the freedom to an education, but can't afford to spend even 1 hour less on the job to go to class, then you don't really have the freedom to an education. The law says you do, but you're not actually free to enjoy it. Think about it like this. We might have missed out on 1,000 Einsteins because poverty kept them from achieving their full potential.
I absolutely
Having
believe
freedom
that.
And the actual ability to exercise it is critical. And this central concern with freedom isn't very surprising. Every political theory wants to maximize or guarantee freedom in some way. If the US had its own ideology, Americanism or something, its advocates would also say it's all about freedom. And to be fair, capitalism did, after all, become the way of life for most people around the world, at least in part.
Yeah, that's one of those contradictions, right? Where like you hear free market and you think, oh, it must make us more free, but really, ultimately, the end result is less freedom. And socialism, like, it is contradictory to where like the end result of socialism could be, you know, from this guy's perspective, more freedom, but it comes like, it looks like at first that maybe you're not getting more freedom. I don't know. It does feel contradictory to me in a sense.
Because it allowed some people to be more free than they had been before. Because before capitalism, there was something else. Feudalism.
Some would argue we're still in feudalism.
Tables of George R.R. Martin-esque pigs with apples in their mouths and guys with cool names like Torf. Under feudal society, the people who were free made up a tiny group. Kings and other nobles were free. Everyone else lived under their control and generally had very little freedom. After all, nobles owned all the land in their kingdom. So if you weren't a noble, but you wanted a place to live, to not be in total abject poverty, and to have a semblance of security, you were forced into working the noble's land. A pretty sweet deal for the nobility, because once you had done all the work, farming and whatnot, they would collect their taxes and force you to give up the products of your labor, grain, meat, or the money made from trading them with others. But feudalism wouldn't last forever. The emergence of capitalism changed feudal society into something entirely new. Over a couple hundred years, merchants gained more autonomy from feudal lords and became a whole new class of relatively free people. Nobles lost a great deal of power both gradually and in violent revolutions, and the number of free people grew from just a few hundred nobles to thousands of people who weren't just born into the right family. Capitalism was born. And we can see how this new system works today. Under a capitalist society, your boss is part of this new group of free people. He, like the nobility of the previous economic era, has a lot of freedom to do what he wants, and a lot of the decisions he makes for himself trickle down and ultimately affect you. In the relationship between the two of you, it's ultimately him that has the power. For example, your paycheck isn't determined by how good a job you do, but by what your boss decides it to be. He has that freedom. Directly or indirectly, your boss...
I think capitalists would say your paycheck is more determined by, you know, market conditions or whatever. Like, you know, a doctor making $200K a year, it's not just their boss was like, you get $200K a year because that's what I feel like you should get. And the guy working at McDonald's gets $10 an hour because that's just what the guy felt like. You know, we do live in a market system, for better or for worse, and those markets do determine pay to a degree, probably to a large degree. So maybe he'll clarify it, but something about that argument did not sit the best with me.
Hires and fires who he wants. You work for him and spend your days producing something that he can turn around and sell to someone else. This allows him to make a profit. Regardless of whether he's a nice guy or not, his profit calculation will demand that he take into account a few things, like how much he needs you and
Is that Jordan Peterson? Why is he in this stock photo? Is that Jordan Peterson and Jon Stewart combined? That's what it looks like.
Out there are gunning for your job. The more those people are desperate, for example, because without your job they might end up homeless, the more he can push your wage down. The more homelessness or poverty there is, therefore, the better it is for him. Your salary isn't determined by how dedicated you are or how valuable what you do is, but by how disposable you can be. You can get up and protest him messing with your paycheck like this, but in the back of your mind, you know that if you push back too hard, you risk ending up with everyone else who is fighting to get your job. Under feudalism, people were made to work the noble's land and hand over the product of their labor. They had no choice and very little freedom to do otherwise. You work the land or you're going to be in a world of hurt. Now, you need to work the corporate, industrial, or service industry gig and hand over your time and whatever you produce while you're on the clock to the capitalist. In theory, you have the freedom not to work, or to work for whomever you want, as well as to negotiate with your employer. But in the same way serfs needed a place to live and food to put on their table, money from employment in the capitalist industry is necessary to live, and it's not like the power is balanced between the two of you. Not long ago, during the dawn of this new economic system, most workers had to hand over the majority of their life, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, to their employers, often from a young age and in unspeakable conditions. We only very recently made this somewhat more bearable. The reason we haven't made even more improvements today is that capitalism did not actually represent much of a fundamental change from feudalism. The relationship of domination and coercion isn't all that different. It's just that this time, the size of the group with freedom is slightly bigger. A couple thousand instead of a couple hundred, and you don't necessarily have to be born into it. This system, for all its flaws, hasn't been all bad. In general, living standards have improved under capitalism for a lot of people. Capitalism is a net improvement, in some ways, from the society that preceded it. But just like feudal society became outdated, so too has capitalism. There have always been problems with this narrative of rising living standards, but recently, capitalism has started to fail even the people who once got a decent shake out of it. 2 or 3 generations ago, it was a no-brainer that a job could get you a house and enough money to support a family, pay your way through college, and get access to healthcare. You weren't exactly free, but you weren't doing too badly either. That is no longer true. The few people at the top have been given so much freedom to keep the money you made for them by working in their offices, at their storefronts, and in their factories that there isn't much left for you. High school and college graduates, once guaranteed stable employment and livable wages, are losing out. Nowadays, between 40 and 50% of college grads are unemployed or working in a job that doesn't require a diploma, indebted at rates that completely overshadow their salaries. And the story's the same across the economy. For someone working at Amazon to make as much money as Jeff Bezos does in just 1 year, they would have to work for 58 years. And that's just with his salary. If we start counting dividends, you'd be working every day of every year of multiple lifetimes just to catch up to Bezos' single lap around the sun. Clearly, it's time for an upgrade. Socialists look at this march of history and ask two questions. One, is there a better way to get the same results as produced under capitalism? And two, what is it? In other words, how do we keep the parts we like from capitalism, rising living standards, and cut out the parts we don't like, the exploitation, imbalances of power, and massively uneven distribution of those rising living standards? The big answer for socialists lies in who owns things like companies. The argument goes that so long as there is just one, or at the most a few people who own our society's productive enterprises, they will be able to make decisions that benefit them and not us. Your boss, because he has been given the freedom to do so, will use his power to curtail yours. He will always try to push your wages down as low as possible, make you work the longest hours you can, make your working conditions as dire as possible, because it's cheaper that way.
That's true. Something I said earlier was like, you know, I did say like the market determines your pay or whatever, but the market doesn't determine everything. Like it does come down to like people with power eventually, you know, when you get to like when you get to like the level of like monopoly or like duopolies that we currently live under, at that point there is no more market. That's the problem with monopolies. There's no market anymore. You just there's one company, there's two companies, sometimes three or four. But ultimately, there's still like functionally monopolies, even if there are more than one or two. You know, I understand mono, whatever. But the point is, they get so much power that over the things we can do, the things we can buy, that the market becomes irrelevant. Thus, their ability to pay the ability for the market to affect employees' pay also becomes irrelevant. I think you can see this in stuff like Amazon. So I think I'm going to retract what I said earlier.
That way, and rakes in more money for him and the other people who own the company. While he has to balance that with what other capitalists will do and try to offer better conditions, hours, or wages, every step he makes in the right direction has to contend with his profit margins. If something is unprofitable, even just by a fraction of a percent less, he can't do it. He can't risk some other company being more ruthless than he is and undercutting his business. The only choices that are on the table are the ones that make him wealthier, even if that means making you poorer or generally worse off in the process. Socialists take stock of all these incentives.
Yeah,
and
I
try
think
to
that definitely
understand
happens
how we
under
can change them.
capitalism.
Instead of the most important thing being the capitalist profit, how can we incentivize things that benefit all of us, putting more options on the table than just the ones that make the guy at the top richer? And we have a lot of ideas on how we can do this, from central planning, to free association between communes, to worker-owned cooperatives, to cybernetic management. However varied these ideas
Are you going to talk about some of them? No chapter select?
are,
All right, let's
and
see.
truly there are a lot of them, they are all united by the same conclusion, that the best way to figure out which ideas benefit everybody to the fullest extent is to let people decide for themselves. Give everybody control over what ideas we want to see happen and how. Instead of a few people at the top setting the rules of the game, everybody should get a say over things like their working conditions. Control over what gets done and how, for everyone, by everyone. Not by some self-appointed class of millionaires and billionaires who get to boss everyone else around. And you intuitively know that this works. How many times has your boss made a decision you know is in the wrong, but you're the one who has to live with it? How many times have you been told that there's just not enough in the budget for a raise?
Not a lot for that first one. Like, I mean, that's not to like completely detract from his point to where like, yeah, bosses can do some incorrect things, but generally speaking, I haven't had that issue the way he put it.
Or for you to take that day off. But the company is raking in record profits. How many decisions are kept behind closed doors until they blow up in your face? You might not always have the answers to every problem your company faces, but if the solutions of those at the top are so good, why are their decisions made behind closed doors? Why do they always make them better off?
Well, yeah, this I agree with. Like, ultimately, yeah, your boss, his boss, her boss, their boss will ultimately make decisions to help the company make money. The way it's currently organized to where you've got this hierarchy, the current hierarchy, yeah, they're going to make decisions that help the company more than they're going to help the employees, for sure. And that is an issue. I'll agree, absolutely.
And not you. Socialists understand that this isn't a system that makes anybody more free or makes things any more fair. Freedom is a two-way street. I can't be free to do what I want if you have the freedom to stop me from doing it. I can't be free if you make all my decisions for me. By all means, when something only affects you, you should be able to do what you please. But if things like my livelihood get involved, it's only fair that we all get a say. And it's becoming clearer to more people growing up today that their odds of living a decent life aren't as secure as they have been in the past. It's going to come down to a lot of luck whether you end up doing well for yourself
It's true.
and living what we might consider a normal life, even if you work really hard.
This
But
is
even
very
though we
true.
see how
I agree with all of that, like living standards, like income inequality. Like here, look at this. Like, let's look at wealth inequality in America over time. Trends in U.S. income and wealth inequality. Yeah, you could look at this. 19. Holy shit, dude. Come on. Like, look at how far, like, what am I trying to say? How like huge the drop off for like middle class has fallen off in the last, 50, 60 years. This would be 50 years. Good at math. And look at how much upper income has gone up in that same time. Like this is not a good thing. Lower income has not touched at all. How can I interpret this? 1981, the income increased faster than income in the family. Like, that's not good. The top 5% of earners do not need more income. The middle and lower classes need more income. And again, this is not like the market determining anything as far as I'm concerned. This is just like the systems, like political systems allowing this to happen. If you let the market do it, it would probably be even worse because we do have some amount of regulation. The wealthy U.S. families is yet to recover from the Great Recession. Medium wealth of families. That's pretty crazy. The gaps in wealth inequality, the gaps in wealth between upper income and middle and lower income families are rising, and the share held by middle income families is falling. Holy cow. So this is just like share. Not even like income. Share of wealth. Holy cow, dude. So the upper income controls 80% of the wealth. That's insane, dude. Yeah, this is not a good thing. Like, so I wish there was some kind of capitalist in here to argue this. Like, is this a good thing to you? Like, to this theoretical capitalist watching this? Like, one, is this a good thing? Should the rich be getting richer and should everyone else be getting poorer? Is this like a sign of a healthy socioeconomic system? Question one. Two, if your answer is yes, then I got nothing more to say. But if you agree with no, why do you think that is happening? What is your solution to that? Is it because the market isn't free enough? And if the market was just more free and there were just less regulations, then, this would go down and this would go up? I disagree. I think we need to regulate this more, tax these people more. So that, like, let's say we tax them more and all of a sudden, boom, these people don't have to pay for healthcare. Anyone like here down no longer has to pay for healthcare, period. So these guys' wealth goes down a little bit. These guys' wealth goes up a little bit because now they don't have that expense anymore. They have more money in their pocket. Let's say, like I said earlier, housing was partially or entirely subsidized. Education, let's say like these guys didn't have to pay for their education, so they no longer had this debt. Things like that could help, mitigate this a little bit, in my opinion. But that's social welfare. Is there a market solution to this? I don't know. I don't think so. Anyway, let's keep going.
how our current capitalist society is leading us down this unfortunate path, curtailing our freedom, or more generally, how the system benefits from things like high unemployment, poverty, and low wages, it can feel scary or even just hasty to jump to socialism for the answer. We can recognize the flawed incentives and inherent economic instability of capitalism and still not know what to do about it. The historical record, after all, hasn't really proved that an alternative system works either. At least, that's what we've been told. But contrary to what is commonly believed, the performance of developing countries in the period of state-led development was superior to what they've achieved during the subsequent period of market-oriented reform. There were some spectacular failures of state intervention, but most of these countries grew much faster, with more equitable income distribution and far fewer economic crises during the bad old days than they have done in the period of market-oriented reforms. Moreover, it is also not true that almost all rich countries have become rich through free market policies. The truth is more or less the opposite.
Okay, I hope he backs these statements up and isn't just saying these. But based on my understanding, this is an approximation of the truth at least. So, like, I hope he backs up what he says here, but we'll see.
With only a few exceptions, all of today's rich countries, including Britain and the US, the supposed homes of free trade and free market, have become rich through the combinations of protectionism, subsidies, and other policies that today they advise developing countries not to adopt. Free market
That sounds
policies
true to me.
have made few countries rich so far and will make few rich in the future. That's a quote from economist Ha-Joon Chang in his book 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism. There's more interesting stuff in there, and it's a pretty casual read if you're interested. And he's not even a socialist, so you don't have to worry about consuming commie propaganda or anything. He's just honest about the shortcomings of capitalism. So what
That's
does
kind of
this
where
mean?
I'm at. Like, I don't know if I would call myself a socialist. Socialists would probably not call me a socialist. But, like, you can't ignore that, like, capitalism has tons of issues that need to be addressed via public regulation. Like, we need to, like, we as a collective, voters, you know, however we want to define it, we need to say, like, at a certain point, like, companies are taking more than they're giving to society, and that they need to give back in the form of something like taxes, potentially. But yeah.
Is socialism just when the government does stuff? The answer is no. For starters, that question implies a lot of really horrible things. You think the DMV sucks? Just wait until the government takes over everything else. You think the government is screwing you now? Just wait until they have even more power. Obviously, a world of DMVs as dictators isn't what socialists want. Who in their right mind would defend something like that? Part of the problem is that that question is being asked in a pretty deceitful way. What counts as the government doing stuff? Sometimes government programs are measures for wealth redistribution, like Social Security, welfare, public libraries, and food stamps. Other times it's basic stuff that every government, regardless of its economic model or ideology, takes care of. Things like fire departments, garbage removal, sewers, or streetlights. In this list are also institutions like the police, the military, the FBI and CIA, courts, and prisons.
That's the thing, like, he just listed, and this is a great list, and it's not even exhaustive, he just listed a bunch of stuff that we pay for as a collective. You know, that's like, that is, you know, collective action is like the core, like, nucleus of socialism, right? What, like, not all collective action is socialism. Like I said before, socialism is an economic system. But the nucleus of it, like I said, is all about, like, collective action, working as a collective. So, like, pooling our funds and then using those funds to pay for the police force. You know, that is social welfare. That is a social program, which those have the exact same nucleus as socialism. Which is why when people are like, we can't have universal health care, that's socialism. What about the other, like, dozen things he just listed that everyone seems to be okay paying for, like fire departments? Why are we cool with collectively paying for fire departments and the police and the military and all those other things, but we can't do, like, healthcare? We can't do education. You know what I mean? I know the answer. It's because there are special interest groups that support these companies, that support private healthcare, private insurance, private education companies. And they fund our politicians. So it is this broken cycle that I think we can fix. Anyway, let's keep going.
Prisons. Wherever you are on the political spectrum, there are going to be things on this list that you don't like and other things that you do. When you imply that socialism is when the government does stuff, and you're already primed to be wary of the word, your mind easily jumps to whatever thing the government does that you don't like, or that the present government does the worst, hence the DMV and authoritarian stuff. But regardless, that's not what socialism is. Socialism is a society in which the means of production, factories, farms, offices, basically the things that produce for the economy, are held by all in common and subject to democratic decision-making, rather than that of a few individuals. Nothing more. While governments
There you go. That is what I understand socialism to be. Let's hear that again, because I was looking away. But that is an approximation of what I understand socialism to be too.
And authoritarian. But regardless, that's not what socialism is. Socialism is a society in which the means of production, factories, farms, offices, basically the things that produce for the economy, are held by all in common and subject to democratic decision-making, rather than that of a few individuals. Nothing more. While governments are one way to coordinate this ownership, it's not the only one. What's more, there's a deeper problem with this question. The way we think of government isn't absolute, empty of all context. As humans, we have a hard time imagining a world that isn't like the one we have now, which means we also have a hard time imagining how our governments could be different from the way they exist today, under capitalism. And you already know what that's like. Companies pumping in billions to get some guy elected and in their pocket. Public services working on razor-thin budgets and being genuinely infuriating. The people you cast a ballot for not doing their jobs and getting paid quite a lot to pretend it's not their fault. Every election going to the lesser evil. The default vision of government we all inherit is one of incompetence, unresponsiveness, corruption, and elitism. It benefits a select class of 1%ers and only tosses a few crumbs to the rest of us. The main promise that socialists have to keep is that we can turn this all on its head. That we can truly arrive at democracy, one that isn't awful and out of touch, by directly involving people in the democratic process at their job and stripping all the power away from the billionaires that sit at the helm of massive corporations with the power to lobby democracy away. That we can coordinate, through planning or otherwise, the production of things in such a way that we are producing according to our needs and desires, not for the profit of a select few. Profit-driven markets sometimes get this right, in all fairness, broken clock and all that, but are still very often terrible at delivering on our wants and needs. Hence why housing is so unaffordable for most people, why homelessness is always so high, why education is out of reach for millions, and why healthcare costs continue to skyrocket. The demand is there. Capitalism is terrible at providing the supply. The mission set out by socialists is to deliver on the promises of capitalism that capitalism can't actually provide. To give you and your loved ones the security, the stability, and the good life that you deserve and that is within our means to provide to all, were it not for a few leeches taking advantage of their undue power and getting in the way of everyone getting a livable baseline to build upon. In short, no. Socialism is not when the government does stuff. You get to decide what gets done. You participate, more directly than before, in the decisions that affect your day-to-day life. Socialists aren't against competition. We're also big fans of innovation, but we don't want to see competition and innovation being used as excuses to push most people towards poverty and make the lucky remaining few ludicrously wealthy. Still, this all sounds well and good in theory, but socialism doesn't work in practice, right? And here we have to pause for a second and understand that socialism, like capitalism, exists on a continuum of policies and ideas. There is no fully capitalist experiment, just like there is no fully socialist experiment.
It's true.
Saying socialism doesn't work is as wrong-headed as saying capitalism doesn't work. More generally, though, it's not like there's a good experimental method to base that conclusion off of. It's not like we can take two countries, control for all their differences, and let them run loose with each economic model. No two countries are the same, start off from the same point, or exist in a vacuum. We can't compare country A to country B and call it a day. Socialist experiments often happened in countries that were poorer to start off with, and generally speaking had to contend with a global economy managed by capitalist adversaries. If this were a scientific experiment, it wouldn't get published. That being said, we can look to the archives of countries that have experimented with mostly socialist economics and see how successful they were, despite the circumstances. One place we might look is Salvador Allende's socialist Chile. Allende was a socialist who won the Chilean presidential election of 1970. In his few short years as president, and we'll get to why they were so short in just a minute, Allende brought incredible changes to Chilean society. He raised wages. Real wages increased by around 22% in the first full year of his presidency. He lowered taxes. 35% of Chileans were no longer taxed at all. He reined in inflation, lowering it by over 10 points. He funded massive housing programs, building tens of thousands of affordable homes all across the country. Education also got a big boost, and enrollment at all educational levels grew. Universities in particular were made free, increasing enrollment by nearly 90%. Hospitals and other medical centers were opened across the country, particularly in underserved, rural, and poor areas. Allende extended maternity leave, doubling it from 6 to 12 weeks. Chile saw a dramatic decrease in poverty, and generally speaking, more people could more fully enjoy their lives. And interestingly enough, the bulk of this new economy was organized through Project Cybersign, a decentralized network of computers that would take anonymous, self-reported, and voluntary updates from workers in productive enterprises across Chile to identify areas where resources needed to be redirected.
How have I not heard about this? Cybersign? Project Cybersign was a Chilean project from 1971 to 1973 that constructed a distributed decision support system to aid in the management of the national economy. The project consisted of 4 modules: an economic simulator, a custom software to check factory performance, an operations room. Interesting. And a nation of telex machines that were linked to one mainframe computer. They tried to automate their economic system in the early 70s. That's crazy. Did it work? There were 500 unused bought by the previous government. Aesthetics. Dude, this is crazy. Help pave the way for big data. A sort of socialist internet. Yeah, that sounds about right. The authors presented a case to defend the feasibility of a planned economy aided by contemporary processing power used by large organizations like Walmart, Amazon, and the Pentagon. The authors, however, question whether, 2019 books, this is recent, question whether much can be built on Project Cybersign in particular, specifically whether a system used in emergency near civil war conditions in a single country covered with a limited number of enterprises and admittedly only partially ameliorating a dire situation can be applied in times of peace and at a global scale, especially as the project was never completed due to the military coup in 1973, which was followed by economic reforms by the Chicago Boys. Who are the Chicago Boys? The Chicago Boys were a group of Chilean economists prominent around the 1970s and 1980s, the majority of whom were educated at the Department of Economics at the University of Chicago under Milton Friedman. Huh. That's interesting. So they instill this coup, and which was followed by economic reforms by the Chicago Boys, who were taught by Milton Friedman. And I don't know who Arnold Harbinger is. He's alive? Holy shit, dude! 98? Okay, what are your political, economic beliefs? That's too much to read. I'm lazy. His influence on economics is reflected in part by the widespread use of the Harbinger triangle to refer to the standard graphical depiction of the efficiency cost of distortions of competitive equilibrium. His influence on the practice of economic policy is manifested by the hyperposition. So, okay. Is he still working, dude? What do you do at 98, man? Where does he live? His 2008 paper? He was writing papers at 84? Dude. Taxation and welfare. Monopoly and resource allocation. Okay. I want to know more about these Chicago Boys. After they finished their studies and returned to Latin America, they adopted positions in numerous South American governments, including prominently the military dictatorship of Chile, as economic advisors. Dude. So they staged a coup on Chile and then brought Milton Friedman educated, like, pro-capitalist economists. Oh no. The Heritage Foundation. Oh no. These guys are like bad. You think of like all the bad stuff going on in America today. It's from these guys. These guys gave us Reagan. These guys gave us Bush. These guys gave us Trump. These are the real bad guys. You know what I mean? Like, everyone's like, oh, who's behind the scenes, blah, blah, blah. It's these guys, okay? These guys, and there's other organizations like them. But no, like, so what did they say about the Chicago Boys? The Heritage Foundation credits them. So if the Heritage Foundation is crediting you with anything, that is a major issue, in my opinion. And I say this, as someone who doesn't even identify fully as a socialist. With transforming Chile into Latin America's best performing economy and one of the world's most business-friendly jurisdictions. Critics point to drastic increases in unemployment that can be attributed to counter-inflation policies implemented on their advice. Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher were influenced by Chile's policies and economic reforms. Yeah, that's no bueno. Interesting. So I want to know more about this 1973 coup. Where's this coup? I saw something about the coup. After the military coup on September 11th, the first 9/11, the 1973 Chilean coup d'etat was a military coup that deposed the Popular Unity government of Salvador Allende. Allende had been the first Marxist to be elected president of a liberal democracy in Latin America. On September 11th, after an extended period of social unrest and political tension between the opposition-controlled Congress and the socialist president, as well as an economic war ordered by Richard Nixon. So why did he launch an economic war? I do want to know that. Political support. Supported by United States. China, Cuba. Small leftist party. Communist Chile. UK, Australia. Center-right party. Yeah, that adds up. Nationals. Conservatism. Dude, it's crazy. So it was like right-wing versus left-wing. Damn. Due to occurring on the same day as the 9/11 attacks in the U.S., the coup has often been referred to as the other 9/11. That's crazy. Okay, I got to see this. I got to read more about this. The military established a junta, military junta, that suspended all political activity. Okay, so hang on. Okay, where were we? A group of military officers led by, okay. So this were the Pinochet dictatorship came about. After his rise to power, Pinochet persecuted leftists, socialists, and political critics, resulting in the executions of like thousands of people, internment of up to 80,000, and torture of tens of thousands. Holy shit, dude. Here we go. Under the influence of the free market-oriented Chicago Boys, neoliberalism, boom, including criticization, removed tariff protections for local industry, banned trade unions, holy shit, and privatized Social Security and hundreds of state-owned enterprises. Some of the government properties were sold below market price to politically connected buyers, including his own son-in-law. Who's still alive? Holy shit, dude. The regime used censorship of entertainment as a way to reward supporters. Dude. This is who we funded. The good guys. America. The good guys. We supported this regime. Holy shit, dude. How did they break through the military dictatorship? Chilean transition to democracy. After the end of the military dictatorship, and particularly to the first two democratic terms that succeeded it, although historians took 15 years. The period was characterized by an economic consensus around free market economics accompanied by rapid economic growth, a decline of anti-dictatorship insurgency that rejected the new democracy and political rule of a center-left coalition led by two Christian. In cultural terms, Chile remained in the 1990s a conservative country with no divorce or abortion law. I mean, I don't know what that was like in the 70s. Civilian-military relations were a delicate matter during the 1990s, and former dictator Pinochet remained commander-in-chief of the army. What's I don't know, like, I sure don't know anything about Chile. Okay, I'm gonna keep it a buck. What is their government like now? Who is their president? What is his political party? Social convergence? Left wing? Let's go. Okay, so they're run by a socialist. During the civil unrest in Chile. What were they protesting? Goals. Reversal of public transport fares. Okay, caused by rise in public transport fares. Probity. What's probity? I don't even know this. The quality of having strong, so moral decency? Weird. It's still going. Privatization, cost of living, and social inequality. So there's a left-wing uprising currently occurring in Chile. That's fucking awesome. On December 19th, 2021, a former student leader and constitutional agreement negotiator, 35-year-old leftist... Oh, yeah, I remember this. Who did he beat? 2021 Chilean election. Republican Party. Oh, God, a far-right party. Dude, that is close. That's crazy, dude. How are they going to do this? Like, if only 55% of your country want the socialist alternative and the other 44% want a far-right alternative, like, that's crazy. Like, that's more polarized than the United States, because we're, like, what we have to deal with is a far-right party versus a center-right party. They have to deal with a far-left party versus a far-right party. That sounds crazy. I mean, the margins are bigger. Like, ours is like 51 to 49 versus 55 to 44. So maybe it'll be a little bit different. I want to watch a video on this. What do I even search? What's going on in Chile? What's going on in Chile in 2022? Here's why voters are rejected. How Chile's socialists won. Who's AJ Plus? Dude, new content farm discovered? Or is he a right-winger? Well, let's see what he has to say. I'm curious. How Chile's socialists won. We'll watch this next. Okay, let's finish up reading this. The Nixon administration, which had worked to create the conditions for the coup, promptly recognized the junta government and supported in consolidating power. Because they were socialist and there was like an ideological difference. Foreign involvement, United States. U.S. intervention in Chile, 1973 coup. Is this just a whole... Wow. Kissinger revealed that they did not have a hand in the coup. They do take credit for creating the conditions that led to the coup. Kissinger says that they created the conditions as greatly as possible. It sounds like you had a fucking hand in the coup. In the final coup. Okay, whatever, dude. Interesting. Operation Condor. So this was just the whole thing about officially and formally implemented in 1975 by the right-wing dictatorships of the southern cone of South America. Was a United States-backed campaign of political regression and state terror. Holy shit. Holy shit, dude. Target, left-wing sympathizers. Dude. Concluded after the fall of the Berlin Wall. So that's when, like, socialism lost and capitalism won. Dude, there's so much I don't know. I'm such an ignorant, like, dumbass. I'm here, but, you know, I'm excited to learn. Yeah, we'll watch this next. Get $45 off YouTube TV with the code HOLIDAY. No. Okay. Oh, yeah, that's how we got there. We were looking at Cybersign. Let's go back another 30 seconds. I'm curious.
Country, particularly in underserved, rural, and poor areas. Allende extended maternity leave, doubling it from 6 to 12 weeks. Chile saw a dramatic decrease in poverty, and generally speaking, more people could more fully enjoy their lives. And interestingly enough, the bulk of this new economy was organized through Project Cybersign, a decentralized network of computers that would take anonymous, self-reported, and voluntary updates from workers in productive enterprises across Chile to identify areas where resources needed to be redirected. The democratic economy in Chile was highly responsive to fluctuating changes, and Chileans reaped the rewards. GDP grew 7% in the first year, production by 13%, and consumption by 11%. By kicking out capitalist enterprises, not only did the Chilean economy work for more people, it worked better, period. This kind of response wasn't welcomed by everyone, though. Allow me to pull quotes from a particular document, the Church Commission Report on Chile, one of the only documents released by the American government to the public about the extent of its intelligence agency's intervention in a foreign country. These are all things the US is actually admitting to. Covert American activity was a factor in almost every major election in Chile in the decade between 1963 and 1973. In several instances, the United States intervention was massive. The 1964 presidential election was the most prominent example of a large-scale election project. The Central Intelligence Agency spent more than $2.6 million, $24 million in today's dollars, in support of the election of the opposition. More than half of the Christian Democratic candidate's campaign was financed by the United States.
That's the right-winger, right? Christian Democrat, Chile. Center-right. Oh, sorry. Center to center-left. I mean, was it always like that, or is there a different party? Political parties in Chile. Okay.
United States. The most extensive covert action activity in Chile was propaganda. It was relatively cheap. In addition to buying propaganda piecemeal, the station often purchased it wholesale by subsidizing Chilean media organizations friendly to the United States. The CIA supported or even founded friendly media outlets which might not have existed in the absence of agency support. The United States' covert efforts to affect the course of Chilean politics reached a peak in 1970. The CIA was directed to undertake an effort to promote a military coup in Chile to prevent the accession to power of Salvador Allende. In summary,
Why?
the White House, intelligence community, multinational corporations, and military wasted millions trying to stop a popular candidate getting elected in a democratic election, and when it failed, wasted another set of millions trying to depose the guy who had improved Chile by nearly every metric. Their first coup attempt in 1970 would fail, but 3 years later, the US efforts would succeed. Allende was ousted as president, opting to take his own life rather than be captured when the Chilean army, hopped up on CIA money, took over the presidential building. What followed was a new era of American puppet government that imprisoned, tortured, and killed hundreds of thousands of people. And Allende's story isn't particularly unique. There are echoes of this story all around the world, everywhere socialist alternatives started doing a little too well. We don't have a magic button to rewind the clock and try this again. We can't for sure know if things would have happened differently if by some accident of history, socialism had become our global economic model all those years ago when capitalism was born. But we can still try to imagine what we can do from this point forward. There's no doubt that this video won't have answered all your questions.
No.
Imagining a different world is a tedious thing to do, and there are a lot of concerns to be addressed. And it's also usually easier to ask questions about something in the future than turn around and ask those same questions about the system we have right now. If we were as critical with our present society as we are with that of the future, would we still choose it? In any case, I've put a link below to a short pamphlet put together by Verso and Jacobin magazine. Most questions people have when first encountering socialist theory are answered in a few short conversational pages. There's answers to questions about human nature, property, authoritarianism, laziness, and other things that are typically concerning, answered in a fair way by people who believe in a socialist future. I'm one of those people who believes that a better world is possible. You've probably seen absurd caricatures of socialists on TV. The Red Scare never really went away. But I hope this video helps to show that we're pretty normal people. We just think that what we have right now isn't working, and it's time to make a change.
I agree with that for sure. Where was that little pamphlet? This is not a little pamphlet. Bro. I thought a little pamphlet would be like 6 pages. This is like a second communist manifesto. Which people say is short, but it's too long for me to read. Dude, I'm not gonna read this right now. You think I have time to read this? About the authors. Is there a table of contents? Can I like skim this? Isn't America already kind of socialist? So I can, okay. Capitalism is free and democratic. Capitalism is definitely not democratic. But doesn't human nature make it? So this is the page I'd need to read. Like, a lot of this Marxism concepts, socialist concepts, sound good, for sure. And a lot of it I think we can implement. Undoubtedly. But a lot of it sounds like you're asking a lot out of people. Anyway, aren't socialism and feminism sometimes in conflict? Why would they be sometimes in conflict? What racism does socialists only care about class? I mean, class is tied to racism, classism for sure. Are socialists pacifists? Aren't some wars justified? Yeah, I mean, I guess. But everyone should be a baseline pacifist. Wouldn't a more democratic world just mean a bigger environmental crisis? See, that's the thing. Like, socialism, it's asking for more democracy. And I obviously support democracy. But people need to be smarter if you're going to have everything be democratic. You know what I mean? And that's why socialists advocate hardcore for expanding education. Something that I definitely agree with as well. Don't the rich deserve to keep most of their money? Well, I mean, I think a capitalist would say the rich deserve to keep all of their money. And I think this is an incredibly nuanced discussion that ultimately I think that, in my opinion, when you get to the end of the light at the end of the tunnel is actually the rich don't deserve most of their money. They deserve a lot of their money, but most of it should go back to their employees and otherwise to society in the form of taxes. Will socialists take my Kenny Loggins records? Yes. doesn't socialism always end up in dictatorship? I mean, we were just looking at Chile. It was like, this is one of those things where, like, they say this, but what happened was, no, so it was democratically working just fine, democratically. And then when they overthrew the socialist Chilean government, that ended up with a dictatorship. Is socialism a Western concept? I mean, I'm sure you could find elements to it in like Eastern thought for sure, but obviously it was created in the West by Germans. Was Engels German?